Copper Junction, Arizona Territory, 1886. Amos Beaumont had his saddlebags packed and Ike had the horses ready before first light, and there was, by any reasonable accounting, no honest reason left for him to still be standing on Charlotte Winslow's porch when the sun came up. The branding was finished. The herd was healthy and counted, and none of it, as she had informed him plainly on his very first evening at this ranch, was for sale. He had come 6 weeks ago to buy cattle and was leaving instead with a full ledger of paid work behind him and something considerably harder to account for besides. Charlotte stood in the doorway in her robe with a cup of coffee she had not yet drunk, watching him check the cinch on his horse for the third time when it did not need checking at all. "Stay for supper," she said, the way she had said it most evenings for 6 weeks running, except this time her voice did something neither of them was prepared for, and the words came out sounding considerably less like an invitation to a meal and considerably more like something else entirely. Amos stopped checking the cinch. To understand how a man who arrived to purchase a herd of cattle ended up standing frozen on a porch 6 weeks later at the sound of 4 ordinary words, it helps to go back to the beginning, to a long ride across bad country and a piece of information that turned out, in the most important way, to be entirely wrong. Amos Beaumont was 57 years old, and the winter just past had been the worst of his 40 years ranching, a blizzard in February that had come down out of the mountains without warning and taken nearly half his herd in 3 brutal days, the kind of loss a smaller operation simply did not recover from without help from somewhere. He was tall and broad through the shoulders still, though the winter had worn a visible weariness into him that had not been there the autumn before. Salt and pepper gone properly gray at the temples, black still threaded through his beard, which he kept short and stubbled beneath a hat that had seen better decades. He wore a cream shirt under a brown coat gone soft with wear, and he moved, since February, with the particular careful slowness of a man who had spent a great many nights doing arithmetic that never came out in his favor. His wife Sarah had died 11 years back, and Amos had grieved her properly and, in time, made his peace with the particular shape of a life lived alone, which was a different kind of loss than the one the winter had just handed him, harder in its own way because it felt to Amos like a verdict on the whole remaining shape of his life rather than simply bad weather. He had one loyal hand left after the winter, an old rancher named Ike who had worked beside him for 25 years and had no particular intention of going anywhere, and it was Ike who had heard, through a cattle broker passing through, that a strong herd was available from the Winslow operation outside Copper Junction, word that was, as it happened, considerably out of date by the time it reached them. Amos decided, against Ike's mild and largely ceremonial objections, that one last long ride to rebuild properly was worth the gamble, since the alternative was watching what remained of his life's work quietly finish dying on its own. Charlotte Winslow was 27 years old, and she had run the family ranch outside Copper Junction alone for 3 years, since her father, Preston Winslow, had died of a failing heart on an ordinary Tuesday morning, sitting at his own kitchen table with his coffee still warm in front of him. She had light red hair she kept practically pinned during the working day, and a light blue dress she wore on the rare occasions the work allowed for it, simple and clean and entirely her own. She was strikingly capable and strikingly handsome in the particular combination that made certain men in the county deeply uncomfortable, since Charlotte Winslow had proven, decisively and repeatedly, that a ranch did not require a husband to run it properly, only competence and a willingness to work harder than anyone expected of her. Her father had left one project unfinished when he died, a small study off the main house he'd been building for his retirement, shelves half-framed and a window installed but never trimmed out, and Charlotte had never had the heart either to finish it herself or to tear it out, so it sat behind a closed door doing neither, a small unhealed thing in an otherwise well-ordered house. Her housekeeper, Hattie, who had worked for the Winslow family since before Charlotte was born, was the closest thing Charlotte had to a mother since her own had passed years earlier, and the one person who knew exactly how many men had approached Charlotte in the past 3 years with proposals that amounted, once you looked closely enough, to offers to take the ranch off her hands in exchange for a wedding ring. The most persistent of these was Gareth Ellery, son of the county's most prosperous rancher, whose own family's land bordered the Winslow property directly, and whose interest in Charlotte, Hattie had observed more than once, seemed to increase in direct proportion to how well the Winslow herd was doing that season. Amos rode in on a Tuesday evening in April, dust-worn and travel-weary after 4 days on bad roads, and found Charlotte at the corral counting cattle with a tally book in hand, and made, without particular ceremony, the single worst first impression of his adult life. "I am here about the herd," he said, removing his hat properly. "I understand you have stock for sale." Charlotte set down her tally book with the careful precision of a woman controlling her temper. "This herd," she said, "has never been for sale, Mr. Beaumont, and I would very much like to know where you heard otherwise." Amos, to his considerable credit, did not attempt to argue the point once it became clear the information Ike had gathered was months out of date and had likely referred, originally, to a much smaller sale her father had once briefly considered before deciding against it. "I apologize for the trouble," he said. "I have ridden a fair distance on bad information, and I will trouble you no further." He turned to remount, weary in a way that went considerably deeper than 4 days of travel, and Charlotte, watching him do it, found herself doing the arithmetic her father had taught her about a man's condition versus his horse's, and did not like what either column added up to. "It is getting on toward dark," she said finally, "and you have clearly ridden further than was wise on a horse that needs rest before it sees more bad road. Stay for supper." Amos turned back surprised. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am," he said. "I know," she said. "That is not why I'm asking." Amos accepted the supper and the offer of the barn for the night that followed it, and told himself firmly the entire time that he would be gone by first light, regardless of how good the coffee was, or how the conversation over Hattie's stew had gone considerably further into the evening than either of them had planned. His weariness, he understood, sitting later on a cot in the barn listening to Ike breathe evenly in the next stall over, was not really about the winter or the herd at all, not underneath. It was the plain, uncomfortable sense that a man of 57 with half a herd and a worn-out heart had very little honest business sitting at a young woman's table, admiring the particular quality of her attention, and that whatever he had felt across that supper table was a debt his current condition had no reasonable way of repaying. He turned the thought over a long while in the dark, listening to the horses shift in their stalls, and arrived, eventually, at the only conclusion that let him sleep at all, which was that a man could feel a thing plainly and still have the good sense not to act on it, and that he intended to be considerably more sensible about the matter than his own tired heart currently seemed inclined to be. Charlotte had her own reckoning to do, alone in the kitchen after the men had gone out to the barn. She had offered supper out of plain decency, she told herself, the kind any decent rancher extended to a weary traveler regardless of the awkward business that had brought him. That explanation held up reasonably well until she caught herself, an hour later, still sitting at the table, thinking about the particular way Amos Beaumont had apologized properly instead of arguing, which was, she was forced to admit, not a quality she had encountered often in men who came asking about her herd. Hattie, clearing the last of the dishes, watched her sit there a full 10 minutes without touching her own cooling tea, and said nothing at all that first evening, though she filed the observation away with the careful patience of a woman who had raised Charlotte's own mother and understood that some things were better noticed than mentioned. Gareth Ellery called on her the following week, as he did most weeks, and made his usual pleasant, persistent case for the practical wisdom of combining two strong operations under one roof. And Charlotte found herself, for the first time in 3 years of hearing that particular argument, comparing it unfavorably to a weary stranger's apology. Amos did not leave the next morning after all, because Charlotte, watching him saddle up with a horse still favoring one leg from the hard travel and a herd of her own that badly needed extra hands for the coming branding season, made him a plain, practical offer that had nothing to do with charity. She needed experienced help for 6 weeks. He needed honest work and a horse fit to travel home on. The arrangement, framed that way, cost neither of them any pride to accept, and Amos and Ike moved into the bunkhouse that same afternoon. The 6 weeks that followed settled into a rhythm built on genuine competence, branding and moving cattle and mending fence line. Hard, honest work that left Amos too tired most evenings to properly examine what he was feeling, and too obviously improved by the labor for Charlotte not to notice the change in him week over week. Supper became, without either of them formally deciding it, a shared table rather than separate ones. Hattie's cooking and Ike's dry commentary and Charlotte's tally book conversations gradually giving way to longer, easier talk that had nothing to do with cattle at all. Ike, watching all this unfold with the patient attention of a man who had buried 2 wives of his own and knew the particular look of a heart working something out, said to Amos one evening while they cleaned tack in the barn, "You have started shaving every morning again, which you had stopped doing sometime around February." Amos did not deny it. "A man should keep himself presentable," he said. "He should," Ike agreed, and did not say anything further, though the look on his face said a great deal. Amos began doing small things around the property that had nothing to do with his contracted work. He repaired a section of the corral fence on a Sunday when he was not obligated to, and mended the pump handle on the well without mentioning it. And Charlotte noticed both, the way she noticed most things about her own land, and said nothing about either, which had by now become its own understood language between them. Sheriff, the one-eyed barn cat who had ruled the Winslow property with total and unquestioned authority since before Charlotte's father died, took a full 3 weeks to grant Amos so much as a glance of acknowledgement, and did so, finally, only after Amos began, without comment, leaving out a small saucer of milk each evening, an arrangement Sheriff accepted with the gracious condescension of a monarch receiving overdue tribute. One evening near the 4th week, Charlotte came out to the corral to find Amos and Ike in the middle of a genuine disagreement about the best route to move the herd to the north pasture, the kind of easy, comfortable argument 2 men who trusted each other's judgment could afford to have in front of company. Ike appealed directly to Charlotte for a ruling, and she studied the fence lines a long moment before siding, diplomatically, with neither of them, proposing a third route her father had used years before. That split the difference. Amos looked at her with an expression she had not yet learned to fully read. "Your father taught you well," he said. "He taught me everything," she said, and then, quieter, "everything except how to finish that study." Amos said nothing to that at the time, though he thought about it considerably longer than the comment seemed to warrant. Hattie found a private moment with Charlotte over dishes one evening and said what she'd been thinking for 2 weeks. "That man has been shaving every morning and mending things nobody asked him to mend," Hattie observed. "I have noticed," Charlotte said. "And what are you going to do about it?" Hattie asked. "I do not know yet," Charlotte admitted, which was, for a woman who generally knew exactly what she thought about everything, its own kind of answer. If this evening has been settling in nice and easy so far, a like on this video and a tap on subscribe would mean a great deal to this channel and cost you nothing at all. Now, back to Copper Junction, because branding season is nearly finished. Amos Beaumont's horse has fully healed, and a man who came here with no intention of staying is about to run considerably short on reasonable excuses. As the branding work wound down toward its final week, Gareth Ellery made what amounted, in Copper Junction terms, to a formal declaration, calling on Charlotte properly in his good coat and speaking at some length about the sensible advantages of a combined operation and a settled arrangement between 2 established families. Gareth had, this time, gone so far as to mention specific figures, the acreage their combined operations would represent, the standing his own family would gain in the territory. The practical sense of the thing laid out with the careful precision of a man who had clearly rehearsed the conversation more than once. Charlotte found herself, partway through his speech, watching his mouth move and thinking instead about the particular way Amos had said your father taught you well, without a single figure attached to it anywhere. She listened and thanked him, and gave no answer either way, which Gareth chose to interpret, not unreasonably given 3 years of precedent, as simple caution rather than genuine disinterest. Word of the visit reached the bunkhouse through Hattie, who mentioned it to Ike, who mentioned it to Amos in the particular tone of a man delivering information he suspected would matter more than he was letting on. Ike found Amos alone at the corral fence that same evening and set his own coffee down on the top rail with the deliberate care of a man about to say something he had turned over more than once. "She is 30 years younger than you, Amos," he said. "I've watched you not say anything about it for 6 weeks, and I have decided somebody ought to say it out loud before you ride home and spend the next 10 years wondering." Amos did not deny the number. "I know exactly how old I am, Ike," he said. "I've also watched a great deal of my life get taken from me this year without my permission, and I have decided I am not going to be the one who takes anything else away from it by staying quiet out of some idea about what an old man has a right to want." Ike was quiet a moment, turning his own cup slowly in his hands. "For what it is worth," he said finally, "Sarah would have liked her. She never had much patience for men who wasted good years being careful." Amos looked at his old friend a long moment. "No," he agreed, "she did not." Ike nodded, satisfied in the manner of a man who had asked mostly to hear the answer land. The branding finished on a Friday, and Charlotte, going over the final tally with Amos at the kitchen table that evening, found herself doing arithmetic of a different kind entirely, understanding plainly that whatever practical reason had brought this man into her house for 6 weeks was about to run out completely, and that Gareth Ellery's proposal, sitting unanswered in the back of her mind, was going to require an answer of its own considerably sooner than she wanted to give one. Amos did not announce that he intended to stay. He simply began, in the final week, quietly finishing what he had started weeks earlier without telling anyone, working late in the evenings after supper on the half-built study off the main house, framing out the remaining shelves properly and trimming the window Preston Winslow had installed but never finished, working by lamplight with a care that had nothing to do with the modest pay his contract technically still covered. Ike, catching him at it one night, asked no questions and simply held the lamp steadier for the last hour of work. Amos thought, planing the final shelf edge smooth, about something Ike had said to him once years back when Sarah first got sick, that a man who spent all his energy protecting people from the trouble of needing him usually just ended up alone and calling it dignity. He had not thought about that sentence in a long while. He thought about it now with a clarity that settled something in him fully. Charlotte, for her part, spent that same final week doing her own quiet accounting, sitting up later than usual with the ranch ledgers she did not actually need to review, understanding slowly that the particular fear that had kept her wary of every man who had ever shown interest in her land had very little to do with the man currently mending her well pump and shaving every morning. For no reason he had offered aloud, and everything to do with the several men before him who had genuinely deserved the wariness. She found herself, one evening, standing outside the closed study door for a long moment before finally opening it, and found it not empty and half-finished the way it had sat for 3 years, but nearly whole. Shelves squared and true, the window properly trimmed, everything her father had started and never gotten to see completed, finished now by a man who had said nothing about doing it at all. She found Amos in the barn checking his fully heeled horse, saddlebags already packed on the rail beside him, and stood in the doorway a long moment before she trusted her voice. "You finished the study," she said. He turned. "I had the time and the wood was already there," he said plainly, the way he said most things. It was not right. A room like that sitting unfinished. Charlotte looked at him, at this weary, gray-bearded man who had ridden 4 days to buy cattle and stayed 6 weeks to build her something he never once mentioned building. "Why?" she asked, and meant considerably more than the study by it. "I am 57 years old," Amos said, setting down the saddlebag he had been holding. "I came here half convinced my best years were already spent and whatever I had left to offer wasn't worth much to anybody, least of all a woman your age with a whole life still ahead of her." He held her gaze steadily. "I have spent 6 weeks watching you run this operation better than most men twice your experience, and I have spent 6 weeks understanding that the tired feeling I rode in with had nothing to do with my age and everything to do with having nobody left to build things for." Charlotte's breath caught. "You built the study for my father," she said quietly. "I built it for you," he said. "Your father just happened to be the one who started it." The barn held them both in a long, full silence, the kind that arrives just before something true finally gets said out loud. "Stay for supper," Charlotte finally said, and her voice did something neither of them was prepared for, the words coming out sounding considerably less like an invitation to a meal and considerably more like something else entirely. Amos understood exactly what she meant by it. "Is that a proper invitation?" he said carefully, "or are you asking me something else and hoping I catch the difference?" "I'm asking you to stay," she said, "not just for supper, not for 6 weeks. for whatever time either of us actually has left, which nobody your age or mine gets a guarantee about anyway." Amos crossed the barn floor and kissed her there among the tack and the smell of hay and horse, gently, the way a man kisses someone he had genuinely believed he had no business wanting, and the Arizona evening held them both in a stillness that needed no further words at all. They were married in June in the small Copper Junction church, with most of the county in attendance, since most of the county had, by then, formed strong opinions about a courtship that had somehow been conducted almost entirely through fence repairs and shared suppers. The Copper Junction church had never seen quite so full a pew count. Word of the courtship having traveled the particular distance, small towns manage even about people who mostly kept to themselves for 6 weeks straight. Charlotte wore light blue, simple and clean, made over from her mother's old wedding lace, because she saw no reason to purchase new when something so plainly suited already existed. Amos wore his good coat, mended at the elbow by Hattie's careful hand the week before, and stood at the front of the church with an ease in his shoulders that Ike, watching from the second pew, had not seen on his old friend since well before the winter that had nearly ended everything. Gareth Ellery did not attend, having taken the outcome as the clear rejection it plainly was, and retreated to nursing his pride at a considerable and permanent distance, a development Charlotte found she did not particularly miss. Hattie cried through most of the ceremony and told anyone who asked that she had known since the 4th week of shaving. Ike stood up with Amos and said, when congratulated afterward, that he had told Amos exactly one true thing in 25 years of friendship, and was glad the man had finally listened to it. The reception afterward was held in the yard between the two houses, long tables set up under the cottonwoods, and Sheriff, dressed in nothing more formal than his usual scarred dignity, oversaw the proceedings from the fence rail with the proprietary satisfaction of a cat who considered the entire event to have been his idea from the start. The two ranches combined that same summer under Charlotte's name and Amos's considerable experience, and the operation that emerged from it was, within a year, stronger than either had managed alone, Ike and the remaining hands from both properties working the combined herd with an efficiency that quietly silenced whatever remained of the county's opinions on the matter. The study became, in practice, Charlotte's favorite room in the house, the place she kept the ledgers now, and increasingly the place Amos found her in the evenings, reading in the good light from the window he had trimmed with his own hands. Sheriff relocated his primary residence to the study's single armchair within the first month and successfully defended his claim to it against all challengers for the remainder of his considerable lifespan. Charlotte kept the Winslow name on the ranch's official paperwork, a detail Amos had insisted on without her needing to ask, on the grounds that the operation had been hers first, and would remain, in every way that mattered, exactly that. The bunkhouse grew busier as the combined herd required more hands, and Ike took to training the newer men with a thoroughness that suggested he intended to still be doing it well into his own old age. In their first winter together, Amos found himself, one evening by the fire, voicing a worry he had been turning over privately for weeks. "People are going to say I got exactly what I rode in here for," he said, "just by a longer road than I planned. A tired old rancher who married himself a young wife and a healthy herd both." Charlotte took his hand, the same hand that had trimmed her father's window by lamplight without being asked. "You built me a study for a father you never met," she said, "before you knew there would be a wedding in it for you. Let them say whatever they like about the herd. I know what you actually came here carrying, and it was not greed." He did not bring the worry up again after that, though she noticed him some evenings, sitting with a quiet contentment that had nothing weary left in it at all. 3 years later, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in early spring, a young rider came up the lane on a worn-out horse, dust-worn and travel-weary, asking after cattle he had heard, on information that turned out to be considerably out of date, might be available for sale. There had been no children in these 3 years, a fact neither of them discussed at length, though the ranch had filled instead with the particular fullness of a life built by two capable people who had stopped being surprised by how well they suited each other's work. Amos still shaved every morning. Charlotte still teased him gently about it, though she had long since stopped pretending she did not notice. Amos, coming out from the barn to meet the young rider, recognized the particular expression on the young man's face immediately, the specific weariness of someone who has ridden a long way on bad information and has not yet worked out how to say so gracefully. "This herd," Amos said, "is not for sale, but it is getting on toward dark, and that horse of yours has clearly seen better roads than the one you rode in on." He looked back toward the house, where lamplight had just come on in the kitchen window, and toward the study window beside it, properly trimmed and warmly lit. "Stay for supper," Amos said, and meant, as he had learned to mean it, considerably more than the meal. From the porch, Charlotte watched the exchange with the particular expression of a woman who recognized her own history repeating itself in the kindest possible way, and called out that Hattie had made plenty, and Sheriff the cat, elderly now and thoroughly settled in his authority, regarded the newcomer's horse with the weary proprietary indifference of a monarch who had seen this particular arrival before, and fully expected it to end the same way. Ike, watching from the corral fence, said nothing at all, though he was smiling in the particular way of a man who has been proven right about something 25 years running. Amos Beaumont rode 4 days across bad country, certain of exactly what he was looking for, and it was not Charlotte Winslow. He wanted cattle, plain and simple, a practical solution to a hard winter, and he very nearly turned around and rode home the moment he learned the herd he had come for was never actually for sale. Charlotte Winslow, for her part, had spent 3 years assuming that any man who arrived asking about her herd had already told her everything she needed to know about his intentions, and very nearly sent Amos on his way with nothing more than a corrected assumption and a night in the barn. What this story argues for, if you look at it plainly, is that the thing which actually saves us rarely announces itself as the thing we came looking for. Amos came for cattle and found instead a reason his weariness finally made sense, a half-finished room that needed his particular hands and nobody else's, a woman who had every reason to be wary of men and enough honesty to eventually see the difference between wariness that protects and wariness that only isolates. Charlotte spent 3 years building a fortress out of reasonable suspicion, and she was not wrong to build it, given who had come asking before. But a fortress built to keep everyone out eventually keeps out the person who was never trying to take anything at all, and it took a tired old rancher with bad information and an honest apology to show her the difference. Neither of them got what they rode in expecting. Both of them got considerably more than they had any right to hope for, which is, more often than either wisdom or planning would suggest, exactly how the best things in this life tend to arrive. Thank you for spending this evening with Amos and Charlotte. Truly, it means more than I can properly say. Tell me in the comments, did you see it coming the moment she offered him supper that first evening, or did it take the study reveal in the barn to finally win you over completely? If this story kept you good company tonight, a like and a subscribe help this channel find its way to more people who might need a quiet hour like this one, and if there is somebody in your life who could use it too, I hope you will pass it along. Whatever you rode in here tonight looking for, I hope you found something better waiting for you instead. Until next time, keep riding. Keep